grandmother's ring. For a photo shoot, she told me she lost it in an airport. 6 years later I saw it on her finger in her own engagement photos. Tonight every single story is about a betrayal that took years to fully surface, not something discovered in a single moment, something that unraveled slowly, piece by piece, until the full picture finally became clear. 5 betrayals. 5 long overdue confrontations. This is the part that gets me every time. Let me take you back to where each of these stories started. My name is Olivia. I am 29 years old. I live in Sacramento, California, and 8 months ago I saw a photograph on social media, shared by a mutual friend, of my college roommate's engagement announcement, and immediately recognized the ring on her finger as my late grandmother's ring, a distinctive antique piece with a specific rose gold setting and a small sapphire accent that I had lent her for a photography class project 6 years earlier, and that she had told me at the time she had lost during a layover at an airport while traveling home for winter break. My former roommate's name is Ashley. We had lived together for 2 years during college and had remained loosely in contact afterward. The kind of friendship that persists mostly through social media likes and occasional messages, rather than genuine ongoing closeness. I want to describe the original circumstances of lending the ring, because the context matters to understanding how significant this discovery was. My grandmother had passed away during my sophomore year of college, and the ring, one of the few pieces of jewelry she had left specifically to me rather than to the estate generally, had become one of my most treasured possessions, something I rarely wore given its fragility and sentimental value, keeping it instead in a small jewelry box in our shared dorm room. Ashley, working on a photography project focused on heirloom jewelry for a fine arts class, had asked to borrow it for a single photo shoot, promising to return it that same evening. She returned home from that shoot without the ring, telling me she must have set it down somewhere during a location change and could not find it despite retracing her steps, a story that evolved over the following days into a more specific claim that she believed she had lost it during a subsequent trip through the airport, though the timeline of this explanation never fully made sense to me even at the time, since the photo shoot had occurred on campus rather than anywhere near an airport. I want to describe what it felt like to see this ring, unmistakably my grandmother's, on Ashley's finger in a professionally shot engagement photo, 6 years after she had told me it was lost. I zoomed in on the photograph repeatedly, examining the specific details I remembered clearly, the particular shade of rose gold, the exact cut and placement of the small sapphire, details that were distinctive enough that I felt genuinely confident this was not simply a similar-looking ring but the actual piece my grandmother had left me. I reached out to Ashley directly, sending her the photograph alongside a message asking, as neutrally as I could manage given my genuine shock, whether this was, by any chance, the same ring she had borrowed from me years earlier. Ashley's response took nearly 2 days to arrive, and when it did, it included an admission that surprised me less than I expected, given how the delay itself had already suggested she was formulating an explanation rather than responding with immediate, genuine confusion. She acknowledged that yes, this was the same ring, explaining that she had never actually lost it at all, but had instead decided to keep it after the photo shoot, having become genuinely attached to it during the project and telling herself, in her own account, that I likely would not miss a single piece of jewelry among what she assumed was a larger collection, an assumption that was entirely incorrect given how few pieces of my grandmother's jewelry I had actually inherited. Update: 4 months later. I pursued a small claims court action against Ashley, consulting with an attorney about my options once it became clear she was not willing to simply return the ring or provide fair compensation for it voluntarily, initially offering only $200, an amount that did not remotely reflect the ring's sentimental value or its actual appraised worth of approximately $3,000, which I had determined through a jeweler's assessment after finally deciding to formally document its value for the legal Proceedings. The small claims process took several months, complicated by Ashley's argument that too much time had passed for me to reasonably pursue a claim, though the court ultimately found in my favor, given that I had documentation of the original loan arrangement through old text messages and Ashley's own written admission that she had knowingly kept the ring rather than genuinely losing it. Ashley was ordered to either return the ring or pay its full appraised value. She chose to pay the monetary amount rather than return the actual ring, a resolution I found bittersweet, having hoped to recover the specific physical object with its sentimental connection to my grandmother rather than simply receiving financial compensation, though I recognized this was likely the more realistic outcome given how attached Ashley had apparently become to wearing it. Our friendship, such as it remained before this discovery, has ended completely. Ashley has expressed on social media to mutual friends that she believes I overreacted by pursuing legal action over what she continues to characterize as a simple miscommunication rather than what I understand to have been a deliberate, 6-year deception about the fate of an heirloom that held irreplaceable emotional significance for me. Ashley wore the ring for 6 years before Olivia ever saw the truth, and just like Olivia discovered her betrayal through a single photograph, the man in story 2 discovered his through something far more methodical, a discovery that required him to go back through years of financial records, because what his colleague had been doing was not a single lie. It was a system built carefully over 5 years. Wait, this is the part that gets me most. Here is what he found. My name is Derek. I am 41 years old. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and 13 months ago I discovered, through a records request I filed with our company's HR department during an unrelated dispute about my own performance history, that a colleague I had worked alongside for over 5 years had been systematically presenting several of my original ideas and process improvements as his own contributions during his annual performance reviews, a practice that had contributed to him receiving 3 promotions during the same period I had remained in essentially the same role, despite what I now understood to be a significant number of my own contributions having been folded into his documented achievements. My colleague's name is Chris. We had started at the company within a few months of each other and had worked on adjacent teams that frequently collaborated on projects, a structure that had made it relatively easy, I came to realize, for him to present shared or originally mine ideas as his own individual accomplishments during review cycles that did not always clearly distinguish between team contributions and individual initiative. I want to describe how I discovered this, because it required a specific set of circumstances to fully uncover. I had requested my own performance review documentation going back several years, initially just trying to understand why I had been passed over for a promotion I believed I deserved, and in reviewing my own historical reviews alongside some project documentation I had separately requested, I began noticing references to specific ideas and process changes that I distinctly remembered originating from my own work, appearing instead in Chris's review documentation as his individual contributions, sometimes using language and framing that closely mirrored emails and project notes I had personally written and could still locate in my own archived correspondence. I want to describe one specific instance that became the clearest example because it illustrates the pattern well. 3 years earlier, I had developed a new workflow process for our team that significantly reduced processing errors, a project I had documented extensively in emails to my direct supervisor at the time, including detailed explanations of the problem I had identified and the solution I had developed. In Chris's performance review from that same period, which I obtained through my records request, this exact process improvement was described, using strikingly similar language to my own original emails, as an initiative Chris had personally spearheaded, with no mention of my involvement despite the clear documentation trail showing the idea had originated with me, and that Chris's actual role had been limited to helping implement a process I had already designed. I gathered comprehensive documentation of at least 4 similar instances across the 5-year period, compiling original emails, project notes, and timestamps alongside Chris's review language that mirrored or directly appropriated these contributions, before bringing this evidence to HR and my current supervisor, requesting a formal investigation into what I believed constituted a sustained pattern of taking credit for work that was not his own. Update 4 months later. The HR investigation confirmed the pattern I had documented, interviewing several colleagues who had worked on the relevant projects and who corroborated that the ideas in question had indeed originated primarily with me rather than Chris, though the investigation also revealed a somewhat more complicated picture than pure fabrication, finding that Chris had, in a few instances, made genuine secondary contributions to implementation that, while real, did not justify the extent to which he had presented himself as the primary originator of the ideas across multiple review cycles. The company's response included a formal warning placed in Chris's personnel file, a requirement that he issue a written acknowledgement of my original contributions for the specific instances documented, and a review of his most recent promotion, which was ultimately not rescinded but was accompanied by additional oversight of his performance claims going forward. I was not offered retroactive promotion or compensation for the 5 years during which my contributions had been effectively obscured, a decision from leadership that I found frustrating but that my attorney advised was difficult to legally challenge given the informal nature of how the original credit had been allocated. My working relationship with Chris has been entirely severed at a functional level. We no longer collaborate on any projects, an arrangement our supervisor implemented specifically to avoid further disputes, and Chris has not offered any personal apology beyond the formally required written acknowledgement, continuing to characterize the situation, in conversations other colleagues have relayed to me, as an unfair pile-on rather than a genuine reckoning with years of taking credit for work that was not his own. Chris built a 5-year system of borrowed credit. Our third story tonight is about a betrayal that was not built slowly, over years. It happened in a single conversation, but the person who did it had been planning exactly what to say for a very long time, because what she revealed was something she had known and hidden for over a decade. This is the part that stays with me. Here is what happened. My name is Lauren. I am 37 years old. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and 10 months ago my older sister told me, during what began as an ordinary conversation about our aging parents' finances, that she had known our father had an affair when I was 17 years old, an affair that had lasted approximately 2 years and that had, according to my sister's account, been discovered by our mother at the time but kept private from me specifically, a secret my sister had maintained for 12 years without ever indicating to me that anything of this magnitude existed within our seemingly stable family history. My sister's name is Michelle. She is 41, 4 years older than me, and had been away at college during the years the affair occurred. Learning about it, she explained, during a visit home when she had overheard a tense conversation between our parents that she had subsequently asked our mother about directly, receiving confirmation of what she had suspected. I want to describe the context in which this revelation emerged, because it happened almost incidentally, in the middle of a conversation about whether our parents' finances suggested any concerning patterns worth investigating as they aged, a conversation during which Michelle mentioned, seemingly without fully registering the significance of what she was revealing, that this reminded her of the financial strain during the period of Dad's affair. A comment I initially thought I had misheard, given how casually it had been dropped into an unrelated discussion. I want to describe what it felt like to realize in real time that my sister was referencing information about our family history that I had never once heard, information from a period of my own adolescence that I had experienced without any awareness of what was apparently happening beneath the surface of what I had always understood to be, if not perfect, at least a fundamentally stable and honest household. I asked Michelle directly what she meant, and she seemed genuinely surprised that I did not already know, explaining, once she understood the situation, that she had assumed our parents had eventually told me as well, or that I had simply pieced it together on my own over the years, given how she remembered general tension in the household during that period, that she had assumed I must have also noticed and understood, even if not explicitly informed of the specific cause. I want to describe the anger I felt, not just at learning about our father's affair itself, though that revelation was significant on its own, but specifically at understanding that my own sister had carried this knowledge for over a decade without ever telling me, allowing me to continue believing in a version of our family history that she had known, for years, was not accurate. Information that might have fundamentally changed how I understood various tensions and dynamics I remembered from that period of my own life without ever having the context to properly interpret them. Update. For months later, Michelle and I have had several difficult conversations since this revelation, with her explaining that her decision not to tell me had initially been about respecting what she understood to be our mother's explicit wish to keep this private, a decision that made some sense to me for the initial period immediately following the affair's discovery, but that became harder to understand or forgive as more than a decade passed without Michelle ever revisiting whether this continued silence still served any legitimate purpose, particularly once I was an adult fully capable of processing difficult family information on my own terms. I confronted our mother separately about this as well, a conversation that revealed she had, in fact, asked Michelle specifically not to tell me at the time, believing in her explanation that protecting my adolescent stability during a difficult period justified the secrecy, but had never actually revisited this decision or given Michelle any updated guidance as I grew into adulthood, essentially leaving the original directive to persist by default rather than through any ongoing, deliberate choice. My relationship with both my mother and Michelle remains significantly strained. I have told both of them that I need considerable time to process not just the original affair but the specific decade-plus of continued concealment that followed it, a distinction I have found important to articulate given that their responses have sometimes conflated these as a single issue rather than recognizing that the original secrecy and its extended maintenance represent two related but distinct decisions that each deserve their own accounting. Michelle carried her father's secret for 12 years. Our fourth story tonight is about a secret that was carried even longer, 23 years, by someone the person trusted more than almost anyone else in her life, and it was not revealed through a slip or an accident. It was revealed deliberately at the exact moment the secret keeper finally decided enough time had passed. Wait, let that sink in. Here is what happened. My name is Rebecca. I am 46 years old. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and 11 months ago my closest friend of over 2 decades told me, during an emotional conversation prompted by her own recent divorce, that she had witnessed my husband, before we were even dating, proposing to another woman in a public park 23 years earlier. My name is Rebecca. I am 46 years old. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and 11 months ago my closest friend of over 2 decades told me, during an emotional conversation prompted by her own recent divorce, that she had witnessed my husband, before we were even dating, proposing to another woman in a public park 23 years earlier in our relationship. I want to describe the specific hurt of this discovery, because it was not simply about the fact of Mark's previous engagement. Information I had, in some general sense, already known existed even without full details, but rather about understanding that Diana had witnessed this specific moment, had known Mark's ex-fiancée's general appearance and circumstances, and had, across more than 2 decades of close friendship during which we had discussed virtually every other aspect of our lives in detail, simply never mentioned this piece of information, allowing me to continue not knowing specifics I might have found relevant or simply interesting to understand about my own husband's romantic history. I asked Diana directly why she had never told me, and her explanation centered on not wanting to insert herself into information that felt, to her, like it was Mark's story to share rather than hers to tell, a boundary I found somewhat reasonable in the abstract but difficult to fully accept given how many other, arguably more private aspects of both our lives Diana and I had discussed openly over the years without her applying similar restraint. Update 4 months later. My relationship with Diana has been significantly altered since this revelation, not severed entirely, given our 23-year history, but noticeably more guarded on my part, having developed a new awareness that Diana apparently applies selective discretion to information she possesses about people in my life, a realization that has made me wonder, uncomfortably, what other details she might know and have chosen not to share over the years, a question I have not been able to fully resolve despite raising it with her directly, since she has maintained that this specific instance was unique given the direct nature of her witnessing the event, rather than representing a broader pattern of withholding. I did discuss this revelation with Mark as well, who confirmed the general accuracy of what Diana had described, expressing his own surprise that Diana had witnessed the specific proposal, and had known this detail throughout our entire marriage without either of them ever discussing it with each other or with me, a coincidence of connected social circles that none of us had previously realized existed in quite this way. Mark and I have had several conversations since about his earlier engagement, details he had genuinely never felt compelled to share extensively given how long ago and briefly significant it had been relative to our own subsequent relationship, conversations that have not fundamentally damaged our marriage but that have added an unexpected new dimension to a history I had believed, for over 2 decades, I understood more completely than I apparently did. Diana kept her friend's secret for 23 years. Our final story tonight, Story 5, is about the longest held secret of the evening. Not decades, a lifetime, because what was revealed had been true since, before the person was even born, and it was uncovered, not through a photograph, or a document, or a friend's confession. It was uncovered through a single, unexpected phone call. This is the last story, and it may reshape how you think about every family secret that came before it tonight. Here is what happened. My name is Michael. I am 34 years old. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and 9 months ago I received a phone call from a woman named Patricia who explained, after some initial confusion on both our parts, that she believed she was my half-sibling through our shared biological father, a man who was not the father who had raised me, prompting a conversation with my aunt that revealed she had known about this situation for my entire life without ever indicating anything about it to me. My aunt's name is Susan, my mother's older sister, someone I have always been close to, particularly following my mother's death when I was 26. I want to describe the phone call itself. because it began with genuine confusion before evolving into something that would restructure my entire understanding of my own origins. Patricia explained that she had recently taken a consumer DNA test and had been matched with me as a close genetic relative, prompting her own investigation that led her to my biological father, a man named Gerald who, it turned out, was not the father listed on my birth certificate and not the man I had grown up calling Dad, but rather a man my mother had apparently had a relationship with during a period of difficulty in her marriage, a relationship that had produced me, though my mother had never disclosed this to the man who raised me, allowing him to believe, for my entire life until his own death several years earlier, that I was his biological son. I want to describe what it felt like to receive this information from a complete stranger, learning, essentially in a single phone call, that my entire understanding of my paternal genetic history was incorrect, and that the man I had grieved as my father years earlier had apparently never known the truth about my biological origins. I contacted my Aunt Susan immediately after this call, needing to understand whether she had any knowledge that might help me verify or contextualize what Patricia had told me, and Susan's reaction, an immediate, visible distress rather than confusion, told me before she said anything substantive that this was not entirely new information to her. She explained, through considerable emotion, that she had known about my mother's relationship with Gerald at the time it occurred, had known about the resulting uncertainty regarding my paternity, and had, at my mother's explicit and repeated request over the following decades, maintained complete silence about this, believing it was not her place to override my mother's decision about what information to share with me, a decision my mother had apparently made deliberately and maintained until her own death, without ever revisiting it, taking whatever specific reasoning she had for this choice to her grave. I want to describe the complicated grief of this discovery, because it was not simply about learning uncertain or surprising information about my biological father, but about understanding that my aunt, someone who had become one of my closest family connections following my mother's death, had known this fundamental fact about my own identity for my entire life and had chosen consistently to maintain her sister's secret even after that sister was no longer alive, to be protected by the silence, extending the concealment well beyond any point where honoring my mother's original wishes seemed to genuinely require it. Update: 4 months later. I pursued a paternity test with Gerald, who was, remarkably, still living and who agreed, after Patricia facilitated an initial careful introduction, to participate, ultimately confirming that he was indeed my biological father, a confirmation that has produced a complicated new relationship I am still navigating, meeting a biological father I never knew existed at 34 years old, alongside a half-sister in Patricia, who has been unexpectedly warm and understanding. My relationship with my Aunt Susan remains difficult. While I have come to understand with time and processing why she felt bound by my mother's explicit and repeated wishes during my mother's lifetime, I continue to struggle with why she chose to maintain this silence even after my mother's death, when the original justification for protecting my mother's privacy no longer applied in the same way, and when Susan, as someone who had become one of my primary family connections, might have used that closeness to finally share information I believe I had a right to know regardless of how difficult the original circumstances might have been. Susan has apologized multiple times, expressing that she now recognizes she should have reconsidered her silence after my mother's passing rather than treating the original directive as permanently binding regardless of changed circumstances, an acknowledgement I appreciate but that has not yet fully repaired the specific trust one once placed in her as someone who, I now understand, was capable of maintaining such a significant secret about my own identity for the entirety of our relationship. That's all 5 stories tonight. If any of these hit close to home, let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you want more stories like this, every single day hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. A like on this video helps YouTube show it to more people who might need to hear one of these stories. Tonight, tomorrow's video has a story that might be the most shocking. one I've shared yet, so make sure you're subscribed to catch it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.